Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for another Pennsylvania Policy Center action call. Whether you've joined us before or this is your first time, we're grateful you've chosen to spend part of your afternoon with us. My name is Felicity Williams, and I serve as the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Policy Center. We are a statewide, nonpartisan public policy research and advocacy organization committed to helping Pennsylvanians understand how public policy decisions affect our daily lives and how we can work together to build a Commonwealth where everyone has the opportunity to thrive. I'd also like to extend a special welcome to all of those joining us, whether that be members of the media, legislative offices, local government, and advocacy organizations and communities across Pennsylvania. Thank you for being here and for engaging in what is becoming one of the most important public policy conversations in our Commonwealth. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping items. All participant microphones are muted to minimize background noise, but we absolutely want today's conversation to be interactive. Please use the Zoom chat throughout the program to ask questions, share comments, and engage with one another. We'll reserve time toward the end of today's discussion to answer any questions or as many as possible. If you experience any technical issues, please let our team know in the chat and we'll be happy to assist. I'd like to begin by taking just a moment to level set where we are in Pennsylvania. We are now more than a week beyond Pennsylvania's constitutional budget deadline. Budget negotiations are continuing, and we're hearing that legislative leaders and the governor's office continue to meet, and that there will be session through the rest of this week and the weekend for both chambers. But as of this afternoon, we have not seen a Senate counterproposal to the budget that the House passed back in April. With every day without a final budget is another day that Pennsylvanians are waiting on decisions that affect our schools, our communities, our economy, and our future. At Pennsylvania Policy Center, we've said throughout this budget season that affordability isn't about one policy or one budget line item. It's about whether families earn enough to get by, whether our tax code is fair, and whether we generate the revenue necessary to invest in the public services that make opportunity possible. That's why we've continued to advocate for policies that raise wages, modernize our tax code, and strengthen public investment. Unfortunately, one thing we know is what didn't happen. The Senate once again declined to vote on legislation to raise Pennsylvania's minimum wage. Pennsylvania's minimum wage has been stuck at the federal floor of $7.25 an hour for 17 years. The Senate has not voted to raise the minimum wage in 20 years. During that same period, legislators have received 19 cost of living adjustments, while workers earning the minimum wage have received none. Today, Pennsylvania has the lowest minimum wage of every single surrounding state. More than 1 million Pennsylvanians would benefit directly or indirectly from raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Now, I also want to be clear, $15 an hour is not a living wage. As you guys know from many of our conversations, in Pennsylvania, an adult with no children needs approximately $23 an hour just to meet basic needs. That's why PPC is proud to be part of the Living Wage for All coalition, where we're continuing to advocate for a $25 federal minimum wage while fighting to ensure Pennsylvania at least begins closing the gap by raising our state minimum wage. If we're serious about affordability, wages have to be part of the conversation. If you agree, I hope you'll take action today. One of our team members, I believe it's going to be Kirsten, is dropping a link into the chat where you can send a letter to your state senator urging them to raise the wage. It takes about 2 minutes, and your voice truly matters. We've also continued to advocate for modernizing Pennsylvania's corporate tax code. 2 weeks ago, the Senate advanced a tax package that once again did not include mandatory water's edge combined reporting. A common sense reform already adopted in 28 states and the District of Columbia that helps prevent multinational corporations from shifting profits out of state while continuing to benefit from Pennsylvania's workforce, infrastructure, courts, and public services. Our recent research estimates that changes to Pennsylvania's corporate tax system, including reductions in the corporate net income tax and the absence of combined reporting, among others, are costing the Commonwealth between $2.21 billion and $2.99 billion every year. One of our team members has already dropped a link to the report in that chat, and later today we'll also be launching another opportunity for you to take action in support of combined reporting. which brings us to today's conversation. One of the fastest moving policy debates in Pennsylvania right now is data centers. Earlier this year, PPC released an analysis of Governor Shapiro's proposed budget that raised important questions about the Commonwealth's rapidly growing investment in data center tax incentives. Our research found that while those preferences were projected to grow from $188.4 million this fiscal year to more than $500 million annually within just a few years, the budget provided little clarity about accountability, job quality, local hiring, community benefits, energy demand, water use, or who ultimately bears the public costs. Then, just over 2 weeks ago, the Pennsylvania House voted 197-5, which was extremely bipartisan, if you know, for any of what's happening in Harrisburg. This is rare, to repeal the state's data center sales and use tax exemption. The very next day, the Senate advanced a tax package that also included repealing that exemption, making this one of the few issues this session where both chambers have signaled on a bipartisan basis that Pennsylvania should rethink this rapidly growing tax preference. In my statement following the Senate's action, I said that repealing the exemption was one of the strongest provisions in the package, and I continue to believe that. Since then, the conversation has only intensified. Earlier this week, the Allegheny Conference on Community Development and the Pittsburgh Regional Building Trades Council, out here on my side of the state, urged lawmakers to preserve the exemption. Communities across Pennsylvania continue to debate proposed projects, new legislation continues to be introduced, and PennLive recently highlighted the rapid expansion of data center proposals across our Commonwealth. It's becoming increasingly clear that data centers are no longer simply a technology issue or an economic development issue. They're a tax policy issue, an energy issue, a water issue, a local government issue, and increasingly, as I said, one of the defining public policy debates facing Pennsylvania. That's why we're so excited to host today's conversation. Today, you'll get an exclusive first look at new jointly authored research from the Pennsylvania Policy Center and the Pittsburgh Community Reinvestment Group, examining the opportunities, challenges, and policy implications of data center expansion across Pennsylvania. We're also grateful to be joined by Jen Quinn from the Sierra Club Pennsylvania chapter, who will help us explore the environmental dimensions of this debate, from energy demand and water use to air quality and the policy solutions currently under consideration. Together, we'll discuss the legislation moving through the General Assembly, the choices facing policymakers, and the practical actions all of us can take to help shape this important conversation. With that, it is my pleasure to turn things over to our Director of Policy, Research, and Legislative Strategy, Dr. Laura Beltrán. Laura, thank you for your leadership on this work. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to be presenting alongside Druta Bhatt from the Pittsburgh Community Reinvestment Group, and she has started sharing her screen, so that's always good news. And with that said, as Felicity kind of gave in her amazing introduction, today we're going to be going over 3 research companion briefs for environmental organizations and partners. Both organizations have put together not from necessarily an environmental perspective, but from a local development and research perspective. With that, we can move on to the next slide. So just a very quick who we are. So Pennsylvania Policy Center is a nonprofit organization based in Pennsylvania, with the goal of advancing tools for expanding democracy and achieving economic justice across the Commonwealth. We bring policy, research, and legislative strategy to the data center issue, and our goal is to help translate this massively complex technical policy questions into practical options for state and local decision makers. And with that, I'll pass it on to Druta.
Hi everyone, I am Druta Bhatt. I'm the research analyst at Pittsburgh Community Reinvestment Group. I'm very happy to be here and do this work with Pennsylvania Policy Center. Pittsburgh Community Reinvestment Group is a regional coalition of 70 plus member organizations in the southwestern Pennsylvania region. We work on advocacy and research on financial lending practices, land use, homeownership, and infrastructure. We elevate our regional voice and increase community capacity and help all our member organizations to have a single voice in the region. What we will cover in today's presentation, we will first start with the state of proposed and upcoming data centers in Pennsylvania. Then we will go over the intent of our work and the purpose of the three briefs we have created. And post that, we will go into detail about the content of the three data center briefs that we have jointly worked on. Data centers in Pennsylvania. Data centers are warehouse-like data storage facilities which create a critical infrastructure for a data-centric economy, which means data centers are essential for websites, for online marketplaces, for cloud services, and for artificial intelligence. As of July 1st, PA has 69 new data center proposals across 33 counties in the state. We have had data centers before. We already have 71 data centers in our state, but the rate at which new development in data centers is coming up is unprecedented. 17 of the new data centers proposed are hyperscale data centers. Hyperscale data centers are a new breed of data centers that are very large in terms of the space they require, in terms of the power they require, and the data that they can store. To give you some examples, a normal small to medium-sized data center requires 5 to 20 megawatt of power, but a hyperscale data center that's coming up in Allegheny County requires 180 megawatt of power. The proposed data centers altogether, if they are all passed, will require 27.9 gigawatt of power. 1 gigawatt is what is required for a small city to run annually. And 42% of data center proposals or entries are large enough that they need a dedicated substation for their power source. Because of the energy requirement and some other costs that Laura will talk about, 42% of Pennsylvanians currently do not want a data center built in their community, according to a poll conducted in 2025. Here's a map of the data centers in Pennsylvania. The blue ones are the ones that already exist and are active. The green ones are the proposed ones. We see that the ones that are already active are clustered around Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, but the proposed ones are a little bit more spread out. And yeah, this is the map of upcoming and active data centers in the state. And I will hand it over to Laura.
Perfect. So when we ask what these briefs are for, again, there's three briefs. We're going to go over all of them very briefly today. One of them is specifically focused on debunking the myths for data center. The other one focuses on what localities and communities can do in terms of the data center growth and the data center debate. And the last one is a very broad overview of the state bills that are currently addressing data centers in the state. Our goal is, aside from environmental groups, also local, state, and decision makers, and obviously the community, as you know, we have the voice to make our decisions heard. And the core goal, as most of the research Pennsylvania Policy Center and Pittsburgh Community Reinvestment Group puts out, is to strengthen policy and community responses before harmful patterns are locked in. And we just intend them to be used in a variety of ways. Our communications director, Kirsten Snow, will be sharing the links for those. And the goal is for you to be able to share them. And please feel free to email us. We'll put our emails at the end if any questions arise. Next one. So starting with the first brief, it's debunking data center myths in Pennsylvania. So here we address the first 6 myths covered. And one of we address several myths, but there's 3 I would really like to touch on. So first one is we already have data centers, so there is no reason to worry. And the truth is, this is really missing the point. So the issue is not whether data centers exist. The issue is what the current wave of proposed developments is. So those are different in scale, power demand, and potential community impact. The second myth we always hear is they will spur major permanent job creation. So this again is not necessarily true. We hear constantly that data centers will automatically create major permanent job growth. So there are going to be construction jobs, and those can matter, but the permanent on-site employment is often much smaller than what people assume, especially compared to the size of these facilities and the level of public resources and infrastructure they require. And the third one that I think it's probably the most important to highlight in this call is that there is nothing we can do about it. So this is just simply not true. There are tools at the local level and at the state level. So we're going to go a little bit on this deeper in the next brief, but local governments can use zoning, public hearings, conditional use processes, impact information, and site standards. And then state policymakers can always require more transparency, stronger ratepayer protections, and clearer rules around incentives. Then we can move on to the next one. So going a little bit into the numbers and the statistics we can use to try to fight against this. So first, not all data centers are the same. So one of the mega data centers uses as much electricity as 100,000 households. So I think that's a statistic that speaks for itself. And as Druta mentioned, there's 17 of these being proposed. So that would be 101.7 million households just in terms of those 17 proposed without the additional ones that are likely to start coming up. Second, we also generally hear impacts are regional, not just local. This is completely true. So while a data center might be in a specific locality, we can expect that because of the resources they're using, the effects are going to expand beyond just that locality. So a good statistic is up to 25% of the potential electricity bill increase is going to be experienced in some regional markets, not only in the specific locality where the data center is impacted. And lastly, the public benefits and the public growth that is expected from these data centers is not automatic. So as I mentioned in the previous slide, this is 100% true. So while you might have a couple hundred or even a couple thousand individuals working in the construction of these data centers while they're built, previous construction in other states like Virginia has shown us that for a 250,000 square feet facility, there's only really 50 permanent jobs after the construction. So the idea that this is going to be a massive job generator is not true. And with that, I'll pass it to Druta for our second brief.
So the second brief talks about local laws and zoning regulations for data centers in Pennsylvania. This is where communities can have a very direct impact on data center development in their municipality. All Pennsylvania municipalities can create and make changes to their zoning laws and can specifically account for data center development. In this brief, we highlight some tools that can make data center development fair and beneficial for the region. The first thing is a dedicated land use category or an overlay district. What an overlay district does, it restricts data center development within a certain industrial region in the municipalities, far from the residential areas. The second is the zoning approval process. Zoning can take place by right approval, conditional use approval, or special exception approval process. Irrespective of the zoning approval process, the regulations can imply conditions and restrictions on the data center development. However, in a by right zoning approval process, there is no requirement of a public hearing, and the zoning board or the governing authority have no discretionary power over the approval, which is why we recommend a conditional use or a special exception zoning approval process such that each data center proposal is viewed on a case-to-case basis. There is a space for public input and community input, and the zoning board or the local governing authority have some discretion on the approval of the process, on the approval of the data center. Then the conditions. In the zoning, we can wrap a lot of conditions and restrictions on data center development so that the costs are mitigated. The most common are like building related requirements like the building height, density, landscape requirement, building facade. Also very important are the noise levels and noise restrictions. Noise is actually one of the most common complaints that communities have regarding data centers. So noise related restrictions are important in the zoning. The other most common complaint is energy and water usage. There can be, within the zoning requirement, there can be full transparency required from data center developers, and they can be asked to formally provide a report on the estimate of energy and water requirement, how they are planning to meet these requirements, and what will be the long-term regional impact of them utilizing the energy and water in the method that they've said. Here, there can also be cost sharing. So, if, for example, in the energy report, they say that we need a different distribution line, then the municipality and the local utility provider can decide how the cost of the new distribution line will be shared and make the data center pay for it. Beyond zoning, it is very important to have public education around any new data center proposal that is upcoming so that the communities have enough time to inform themselves and present informed arguments during the public hearing. Beyond reducing the costs of data centers to improve or increase the benefits of the data centers, there can also be innovative community benefits agreements, like asking data centers to invest in environmental based infrastructure or asking them to invest in research and development on artificial intelligence or any local or regional priority can boost the benefit of the data center and hopefully match the cost of the data center. The main takeaway here is that municipalities cannot prohibit any lawful business, including a data center, from completely coming up. But they can shape where and how these facilities are developed so that the benefits of the data center outweigh or match the costs of the data center. And here is an overview of the conditions I told you about. And with that, I pass it on to Laura again.
Perfect. And this is the last of the briefs we put out. So this is the data center oversight bills. So we focused on 4 core House bills and 5 additional proposals that were reviewed as they came in, and as this is kind of becoming a topic that more legislators are taking an interest in. So an easier way to understand this is because data centers are such a very broad topic, we organize them very broadly in 4 buckets. So the first major bucket of which these bills can belong in is in terms of energy and water reporting. So because communities cannot evaluate impacts they cannot see, if a facility is going to require significant electricity or water, that information should be available before decisions are made. So there are some bills focusing specifically on energy and water reporting. The second one is model zoning assistance. So again, because we have so many localities and localities with very different resources, we see that many municipalities are being asked to make decisions about the type of development they would want to see or they would not want to see. So model zoning can help local governments ask the right questions and create clearer standards, such as the standards that Druta was referring to in our second brief. The third bucket is labor standards tied to incentives. So basically, if we're going to be using public dollars or tax benefits, as is the current sales tax exemption that data centers have, are going to be used to support these projects, there should be public expectations in return. So these expectations would be around job quality and worker protection. So that's kind of the third bucket of where legislation can be going. And then the fourth bucket is on utility cost allocation and ratepayer protection. So this is perhaps one of the biggest issues because it's the one that directly affects us. So if we're going to see that major grid upgrades are going to be needed, or it's going to, take a lot of expenses from the current grid, hence by raising our bills, we need ordinary households and small businesses to be protected so they're not left footing the bill. So let's go on to the next one. So these are just so the four main bills we initially worked on were HB 2150, which is again dedicated to energy and water transparency, and that's basically asking for more strict reporting on data centers on the energy and water they're using. There's HB 2151, which is the local zoning capacity, which again is focusing the most on giving municipalities those model ordinances so they can take decisions on what they would like to see in their communities. There's HB 2061, labor standards tied to tax incentives, and HB 1834, which is ratepayer protection and utility regulation. And then there are some additional bills that when we, first wrote these, they had not been introduced yet, or they had not gotten as much movement. But I would really like to highlight that HB 2496, which is the one that had the most recent movement. So that one moved in June 30th, 2026, and that was the Senate local government reporting it as amendment, and it's currently referred to the Senate Rules and Executive Nominations Committee. So that one would create a pause zoning consideration period for data center proposals under the Municipal Planning Code. So it would allow municipalities to pause for, I believe it's 180 days. Just the fact that, data centers don't need to be continuously approved. It would give them some additional time to revise what needs to be done. So that one passed the House June 24th, 201 to 1, which is almost unheard of. And then it has been in the Senate since June 30th. And then the second bill that I really wanted to highlight was HB 2198, which, as Felicity, our executive director, mentioned in her beginning remarks, has probably gotten the most flack from some of the business groups. So this one would be repealing the Computer Data Center Equipment Incentive Program, which is basically the current sales tax exemption for data center equipment. So the most recent movement was June 26, and it was referred to the Senate Finance after the House passage. We also saw it in the Senate bill that was passed, I believe, June 25th. And then since then, it would save the Commonwealth roughly $188 million a year, with the possibility of saving up to $500 million a year, as this is kind of the cost because of the rapid expansion we're seeing, that this exemption is likely to cost by 2031. But then, of course, we also have other smaller bills that are still moving. So there are some other reporting requirement bills, such as HB 2246, which is the water usage reporting requirements, but that one hasn't moved since April 27th. We have HB 2150, which was the first one on energy and water transparency, and that one also hasn't moved since April 23rd. And 2151, which is the model ordinance, also hasn't moved since April 23rd, 2026. So all of this is to say this is still very alive in both the Senate and the House. Perhaps the House has currently taken a little bit more steps to try to get protections towards communities. And we see some more stalling on the Senate side, although, they are still supporting the removal of the tax exemption, the Computer Data Center Equipment Incentive Program. So with that said, those are kind of our three briefs. I believe Kirsten has already put the 3 links for them, and I'll pass it back to Jeff.
Okay, thank you so much, Laura. Thank you as well, Druta. I'm dropping information here in the chat to remind people that if you have a question for either Laura or Druta, you can drop that in the chat. And you can also include questions for our next speaker, who is Jen Quinn with the Sierra Club of Pennsylvania. Jen, go ahead.
All right, thank you. Give me 1 second to share my screen. Sorry, this is a brand new computer, so of course it's not going very smoothly.
As you're setting that up, I'll just remind folks that we have dropped a lot of information in the chat. You're welcome to click on those links there. There have been some questions about, will this information be available later? Yes, we will send out an email that will have the resources that we've been sharing and talking about today. I would encourage folks to think about signing up on our website to get onto our email list for announcements about these kinds of things and others. Jen, there we go. I just wanted to check and see if you got the screen share. It looks like you do. So I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay. Are folks seeing this?
I can see your screen, but it looks like it's not in slideshow mode. So we see like the PowerPoint with
Okay.
the slides on the side. But seeing
Okay.
your screen is
My
perfect.
apologies. Sorry, this is the
No,
mistake of having a brand new computer. Yes.
no, good.
Perfect.
So I'm Jen Quinn. I'm the Legislative and Political Director for the Pennsylvania chapter of the Sierra Club. For those not familiar with Sierra Club, we're the nation's largest and oldest environmental advocacy organization, and the Pennsylvania chapter, largely Pennsylvania focused. So all legislation, regulations that relate to the environment on the state level. So why are data centers choosing to locate in Pennsylvania? They're doing that because of our available land, our power grid. We're one of the few states in the region that has abundant power and can export power, and our abundant water resources that we're known for, I think, second only to Alaska in stream miles and rivers. There are a long list of environmental impacts from air and water to new fossil fuel plants, increases in emissions, more impervious surfaces, loss of forest and farmlands, e-waste, heat islands. I will not be covering all of those since the list is so long, but I'll be covering just a few. So water, first off, I think all of us have heard something about data centers' insatiable appetite for water. Hyperscale and AI data centers need up to 5 million gallons per day, and that's very often a direct consumptive use, primarily for evaporative cooling. This equals the daily water use of about 61,000 people, roughly the population of Harrisburg and the surrounding townships. Annually, that's about 1.8 billion gallons for a facility that size. And then for a real world example, there's a proposed hyperscale facility in Cumberland County that's been approved for 400,000 gallons per day. And with dozens of proposed data centers, this cumulative demand could make data centers one of the state's largest water use sectors very quickly, especially in the Susquehanna River Basin, where hyperscale facilities have the potential to be among the largest consumers of water. So if we're going to satisfy the electricity demands of data centers, we're going to need to generate more electricity. So peak load growth in PJM, which is our regional grid, is growing pretty rapidly. We're expecting to see about 30 gigawatts of growth by 2030, and that's largely from data center demand. So water usage for this electricity growth, of course, depending on source of electricity, is expected to be 2 to 3 times that of data center on-site cooling needs. So for example, if you have a large facility that needs 5 gallons of water a day for cooling, you're looking at roughly 10 to 15 million additional gallons of water used by the power plants to produce that electricity. And then data centers also have the potential to keep fossil fuel plants open longer, lead to new gas generation being built, and they can delay the clean energy transition. And then traditional evaporative cooling, as we just mentioned, uses large volumes of water, and much of that evaporates while cooling servers. With the rest of that water being discharged is something called blowdown or concentrated wastewater. This discharge often contains concentrated minerals, salts, biocides, corrosion inhibitors, and heavy metals. And then the warmer waters can also cause thermal pollution, harming aquatic ecosystems and reducing oxygen levels. And then data centers also use PFAS. We've all heard of PFAS, the forever chemicals. They use that in cooling fluids, fire suppressants, server manufacturing. So direct spills from data centers are not yet widely documented for PFAS, but their rapid growth is raising concerns. PFAS-containing chemicals can leak during maintenance, entering wastewater during discharges or draining, or they can leach from e-waste. We have seen supply chain manufacturers cause major drinking water contamination in North Carolina while expanding production for data centers. And so I wanted to touch briefly on the value of water in Pennsylvania. So in Pennsylvania, water is generally treated as a public resource with costs that reflect the operational expenses for supplying water and treating water and the infrastructure that we use, rather than its environmental value or a scarcity value. This, in my opinion, often leads to undervaluation, especially for large users like data centers, where fees and rates are really minimal compared to the resource's long-term sustainability costs and impacts like aquifer depletion, ecosystem harms, or drought resilience. So for example, a project, a data center needing approval from the Delaware River Basin Commission, there are pretty low application and monitoring fees for their water withdrawals. So the water supply charges are just $105 per million gallons for a consumptive use and $1.05 per million gallons for non-consumptive use. So if you do the math, a 100,000 gallon per day consumptive use withdrawal really only totals between like $2,000 to $5,000 annually. And keep in mind, if you're withdrawing 100,000 gallons per day, that's 36.5 million gallons per year. So these facilities are getting their water almost for free. And it's just something to think about how we value water in Pennsylvania, because this is something that has long bothered me. So some solutions for the water issue. So this bill was already mentioned. I think transparency matters, that the state can and should mandate reporting of water and energy use and make that public. This is what HB 2150 requires. Knowing the water needs of data centers before they're built, creating specific permits for data centers, and including these large users in the state water plan. So withdrawals are looked at cumulatively. This is what HB 2246 does. Using carrots and sticks, right? The state can just flat out require minimum water and energy efficiency standards, or they can leverage the existing tax credits to achieve improved water and energy efficiency standards. If you want the tax credit, you must do X, Y, and Z. This is what the governor's grid proposal, HB 2650, does. And then House Bill 1834 was already mentioned. This is a hugely important bill. It requires data centers to get an increasing share of their electricity from clean, firm energy sources like solar and wind paired with batteries, geothermal, hydropower, to ensure we're building more clean energy and less fossil energy. It also requires data centers to contribute to a LIHEAP fund and a clean energy fund, so we're developing more clean energy. And then for the value of water, I mentioned there's also House Bill 2682, which would assess a fee on these extraordinary water users. We've seen this bill many times from Rep. Sterla, and I think it most recently was introduced by Rep. Otten. So there are solutions to some of these problems. The question is there political will to enact these protections? And then I also want to bring attention to a likely source of localized air pollution. This is diesel backup generators at large data centers. Backup power is needed for reliability, but the technology choices made today can impact local air quality for decades. So data centers rely on diesel generators for emergency power. This equipment is also routinely tested. Now, while these generators don't run very often, when they do run, they can emit really high amounts of nitrogen oxides or NOx, which contribute to ozone and smog, and fine particulate matter, which is linked to asthma, cardiovascular disease, and premature death. These impacts are increased where multiple facilities cluster or where generators are located near homes, schools, or sensitive populations. And so again, the solutions: strengthen air permitting, right? Make sure DEP is looking at generators cumulatively and require the cleanest diesel technology, which is a Tier 4 engine. Limit testing and run times, set limits on how often and how long generators can run for testing. Push for cleaner technology. Batteries and even natural gas are cleaner options for backup power, and link existing tax breaks or make tax breaks for adopting that cleaner backup power. Now, I think that was my last slide. Yes, so I'm happy to answer any questions folks may have, and I will stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Jen. That was really helpful information. And we're getting a lot of really great feedback in the chat from folks indicating how much they really appreciate getting this information. I'm going to go to a few of these questions now. You can continue to put questions in the chat, and we will get to as many of them as we can. We always wrap these up by 2 p.m., so we do have some time today. First, I want to note, a number of folks asked, will these materials be available? Yes, they will. We will be sending out an email following up on this meeting with these resources. We do have those there in the chat, the links to the 3 papers that were mentioned. And of course, we have the really big one still to come out. I want to note here some of the things that folks are saying about this information. Stacy commented and said, it's difficult to find data about the low frequency noise emitted by data centers and their health impacts. It's been compared to the low frequency noise transmissions found embedded in the residences of the U.S. Ambassador and State Department employees in Cuba. I'm hearing that data centers' low frequencies impact animals for miles beyond the setbacks currently being discussed. It'd be helpful to find studies that validate or debunk this info. So I think that's the question here. Are there studies that either validate or debunk that? See if any of our panelists have an answer to that question.
I don't know of studies comparing like data center noise and how it affects animals, but I do know that data center noise is like low frequency noise, which is why it is as per the general city limits for noise restrictions, but there needs to be like extra limits for data centers because it's like a low hum that continuously goes on. And I also know that in the past, where in Virginia, especially when data centers were placed in commercial areas closer to residential areas, they had to be shut down because the communities were complaining of noise. So it's one of the big community complaints, which is why data centers should be placed in like industrial areas far from residential areas. But I do not know how they impact like animals and marine life or anything like that.
But it sounds like it's pretty well established that they can be very noisy places in communities. And that's why we want to support the idea of communities having input. Laura, go ahead.
I was going to add, I think I saw recently, like in the last couple days, an article from CNN that it kind of mentioned how it affected, I believe it was the Nashville Zoo. So there is, because they're so recent, there has begun to be some emerging coverage on the effects of animals. And I think the Nashville Zoo is actually complaining about how the low humming frequency noise is affecting the animals of the zoo. I can try to find the link and drop it in chat.
Very interesting. Thanks so much, Laura. I'm going to go to some of the other questions we're getting here. Just trying to get some of these together thematically. So a question here from Lisa. Lisa wants to know, she says, Amazon claims it would use ambient air to control the temperatures in their data facilities 96% of the time. It would not need a lot of water except for 4% of the year on the hottest day. Is that really possible? I'll open up to any of our panelists who want to chime in.
I don't know if it's possible, but I do know that if, for example, a data center says that, hey, I'll use so much water or so much energy, and in the zoning, you can have regulations to make these conditions really strict so they can't go back to it. For example, if like a data center, if Amazon is saying they'll use so much water, but once it's active and running, if they use like much more water than what they previously claimed, they might have to give fines and their approval might also be taken back, which means they might have to shut down. So locally speaking, these conditions we can make it like really strict for them to stick to whatever they say they will use.
Thanks so much for the question, and thank you for addressing that, Druta. I want to note that Kirsten just dropped an article there from Penn Live today as well, talking about some of the issues around data centers. And Lorraine also noted there in the chat that farmers near these centers talk about stillbirths among their animals. So sounds like more research looking into that as a possibility is something else. Going on to a couple other questions here. And I see Felicity has her hand up. Felicity, go ahead.
Just real quick, while you're pulling those questions together, Laura was absolutely right. It is the Nashville Zoo. And I did drop a link to the chat to a CNN article about that issue there as well. So yes, just wanted to flag that for folks also.
PPC team getting answers to your questions on the spot, live and in
real
person.
time.
There you go. All right, let's move on here. Question from Beth. Isn't there also an issue about how and where data centers dispose of the heated water they use to cool the center operations? Any of our panelists want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I mentioned that really briefly. Yeah, if you're discharging into a stream, a creek, of course, it's just like a power plant. Those thermal discharges could impact, the local ecosystem, fish population. So typically, DEP has thresholds and limits there, and hopefully they would be enforced and monitored, which is hugely important for all industrial discharges.
Thanks for the question, and thank you for addressing that as well, Jen. From Karen. Karen says, there is a parcel of land being marketed for AI data center located in 2 townships. Neither one has any zoning or SALDO saldo. assuming we know what that means. We are told that they do not have the money to start the process. Suggestions?
This is where I think the state model zoning ordinance can be helpful, where they don't have to literally go over each and every aspect of the zoning, and they can directly like borrow it from the state and use it. But I understand that we also have this in Allegheny County, where a lot of municipalities are really small, and they don't have they've not changed their zoning laws since forever, because of budget constraints and we're also looking at how the county can play a role. Technically it cannot, but the county, like Allegheny County is trying this, and maybe other counties can also try to have their own like model zoning ordinance for their municipalities.
And related to that, as you were answering the question, Druta, our friend Frank dropped in the chat there some information about Lancaster County's community benefits agreement. It's relatively strong, Frank says. We fought hard to force the city administration to obtain it. So it's a good example of some local efforts fighting back and making an impact. Felicity, go ahead.
If I could just say briefly, so to summarize a couple of those points there, if localities don't currently have zoning ordinance, Druta, you are speaking to the fact that they could work on adopting some, or Frank sharing that as an alternative approach, advocating for a community benefits agreement in the absence or even in conjunction with, right, local zoning ordinance and or protections.
Thanks so much, Felicity, for helping to give a little bit more context on that. Another question here from Maria. It's one of those questions about follow the money. Who makes the most profit from the centers? I do not think they will care about the environment and will choose to pay fines like the steel mills. They will not care about the price of electricity or water for the citizens. So I guess that's an interesting question there at the beginning. Who makes the most profit from data centers?
I can't handle this one. So off the bat, it would be mostly the cloud and AI companies, since one of the main reasons why all of these data centers are being set up is so that people can continuously use and become reliant on ChatGPT, Claude, and all of these AI softwares. And possibly also the chip producers that are enabling this technology to occur, which is, I mean, if you are familiar with like the stock market, is kind of what's bumping up this bubble. It's kind of this weird relationship between data centers, NVIDIA, which is like the chip producers, and then your Google, Meta, and like AI companies. So off the bat would be those three, and then it just kind of goes down from there, right? So like probably construction firms are gonna benefit temporarily because they're building these massive buildings. You're probably going to have some equipment suppliers benefiting, but it is not the community, and it is not local governments who are the main beneficiaries of it, at least not anytime soon, while we see that they are costing the state more. And like I actually believe I have seen some news about several payouts the governments have to do, the federal government has to do to keep them profitable, because as of now, none of these companies are really profitable, which is a separate issue. Jeff, you're muted, I think.
Sorry, I didn't realize I was muted there. Yeah, sorry, we had a follow-up kind of related to that, Laura, from Linnea. Does a municipality make money off of a data center? Is it as much as they say? That's all I hear from politicians.
So municipalities, in the sense that assuming they're taxpayer corporations, would be able to raise some revenue. Now, we do not have specific numbers as to what that revenue is. It is likely not making up for the environmental impacts and for the community harm that is causing, but we do not have specific numbers, especially because to ideally say how much revenue they're bringing in, we would also want to know how much it's costing at the state and federal levels. And we already know that at the state level, they're costing roughly just the one tax exemption, 188 million a year, with the possibility of going upward to 500 million. And at the state level, at the federal level, there have been some payouts to them. So it is possible we're getting some revenue from data centers. I would not be able to convincingly say that it is as much as some legislators are arguing.
Thanks so much, Laura. I'm going to go through a couple of these real quickly as fast as we can. We do want to have some closing remarks from each of our speakers. But one question here from my friend Emma, who also lives here in Philadelphia, as do I. Question is, how do you think we should create a narrative around the importance of paying attention to data center proposals that aren't in your neighborhood? In other words, how would a data center 20 to 50 miles away from my home impact my life?
I mean, one of them I always like to say is you can't really contain water to a single source. Water travels. So even if you're seeing the initial impacts of water pollution in a specific area, chances are it's not only going to stay there. And then I believe Jen brought up a lot of good points in terms of how, effects to the environment can also have byproduct effects to surrounding environments. So it's not going to be immediate too. When we think about the electricity costs and the water usage costs going up, it's generally not, contained to a 5-mile radius or only where the data center is. It tends to be a regional impact, and the more pressure we keep putting on our grid, it is likely that even if people farther away are going to see a lower impact, they're still going to see an impact. And overall, I just think it speaks to, community and potential displacement. You don't want necessarily people that we're living in a neighborhood or a community would eventually have to move to other areas or consider moving to other areas because now they're polluted by noise pollution and the environmental pollution that comes from data centers.
Thanks, Laura. All right, I'm going to go with the last question. It's a two-part one. It is initially coming from Rose, who says, Allegheny County, Springdale has a data center in the works, and Westmoreland County, Upper Burrell, is considering a data center. Is there any information on cumulative effects of having two hyperscale data centers close together? And a follow-up on hyperscale centers from Ed, how much concern is there for data centers that are not at hyperscale level? Quick answer on that.
I don't know about the joint effects of both Springdale and Westmoreland, but I know Springdale was very contentious. First of all, there was a lot of community concerns, but it was still passed because they didn't have the special exemption or the conditional use zoning approval process. And it's a hyperscale data centers with 118 megawatt power required annually. That's a lot of that's a big data center. And another unique feature about a hyperscale data center is that it can scale quickly because of the architecture of it. It can increase its size manifold in a few years if it faces the requirement. So the impact in terms of the energy usage and the land that it will use and water and everything is massive. For the smaller data centers, they still do have an impact, and especially because there are so many of those now coming up, the cumulative impact of data centers is huge, even if they are individually small.
Thank you, Druta, and thank you so much for those great questions, folks. We didn't get to all of them. We got to a lot of them. If you do have follow-up questions, you are welcome to reach out to any of our panelists as well. I do want to give them each an opportunity to kind of just give a final thought and any specific action step that folks can take if they're concerned about data centers in Pennsylvania. I'm going to start first with my own team. So I'm going to go to you first, Laura. Any closing thoughts? Anything folks should know about taking action?
I mean, we're we released a piece recently on the Senate bill, which specifically talked about the fact about the Senate basically saying or trying to repeal the sales tax exemption for data centers. So I would always recommend people to read that brief. I believe Kirsten can also link it in chat. And more importantly, we're probably going to put some actions out in terms of one, combined reporting, which might also touch on data centers because a lot of these exist in tax havens. And second, I would encourage to keep following us. We're always putting stuff out, and I have a hunch that as this budget negotiations process continue, we're going to have a lot more stuff to put out.
Thanks, Laura. Druta.
I think as a final thought, I would like to say that data centers, just like any business, should have the responsibility, and they should exist only when the benefits far outweigh the costs. So it's important to create enough regulations and restrictions and conditions so that they are critical, they can exist, but only when the societal benefits are far more than the costs.
Thanks, Druta. And Jen.
Sure. So as it was mentioned, the budget is happening. We have a lot of concerns that the 180-day pause will be enacted and then nothing else will happen. So there's nothing wrong with the pause happening, but we still need to have regulations, right? We're really concerned that they're just going to kick the can down the road and not pass any regulations. So we have loads and loads of toolkits on House Bill 1834, 2150, 2151. If anyone wants those to take action, make calls, send an LTE or an email, reach out. We have those. And then Sierra Club also has a regular legislative briefing on Tuesdays at 5 to keep you in the loop on all of the environmental, legislative, and regulatory happenings in Harrisburg. So feel free to reach out to me if you want to sign up or want any of those toolkits.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Jen. And again, thank you to all of our panelists, Laura, Druta, Jen. I want to thank my colleagues here at Pennsylvania Policy Center, Felicity, Kirsten, Adrian, for all the tremendous help getting these policy action Zoom meetings together. You did mention, Jen, the state budget, and we started that off at the beginning. Guess what? If you want to know more about the state budget, and if we have a state budget, what's in it, we will come back 2 weeks from today on Thursday, July 23rd at 1 p.m. for our next policy action Zoom meeting, where we will be looking at where the budget is at. Is it completed? Is it not completed? What's in it? Come back and join us 2 weeks from today. Again, thanks everybody for joining us, for making the time. And thanks for all you do to make Pennsylvania the kind of Commonwealth where everyone can survive and thrive as well. Have a good one, everybody.